The sharp cry of a newborn echoes in the cold night, while the gigantic claw of the Ninetales brutally pierces through Minato and Kushina's chests. Imagine the absolute terror of this scene happening exactly as you remember it, but with a sick and completely disturbing detail altering the destiny of Konoha. That blood-soaked baby wasn't just a newborn crying out of sheer survival instinct, but the mature soul of the Seventh Hokage trapped in a tiny body, watching his parents sacrifice while the weight of the entire future burned in his mind. To understand how we got to this chaotic scenario, we need to turn back the clock to the exact millisecond Naruto's soul transcended the fabric of reality. In a distant future that crumbled under the flames of a lethal war, the hero you admire gave up his own existence to activate an ancestral ceiling that broke the barriers of life and time. He expected eternal rest after sacrificing all his vital chakra, but the universe had a much more sadistic and unpredictable script reserved for the savior of the ninja world. The transition was anything but peaceful or mystical. It was actually a devastating physical shock that tore through the warrior's sanity. He woke up suffocating and tied down in dense darkness, feeling a crushing pressure that limited his movements while he desperately tried to summon nature chakra to no avail. Slowly, the terrifying revelation took over his sharp spirit, making it crystal clear that he was reincarnating in Kushina's womb, and that the masked man's fatal attack would happen in a matter of minutes. Despair invaded the experienced mind of Konoha's leader, colliding head-on with the pathetic reality of a body that couldn't even breathe on its own outside his mother's belly. He knew exactly what Obito was going to do down to the millimeter, and recognized every trap of the plan to unleash the tailed beast, but his newly formed tiny muscles ignored the desperate commands of his adult consciousness. This torturous helplessness sparked a silent revolt in his soul, forcing Naruto to attempt a suicidal move by compressing his own spirit to accelerate the development of his energy channels. When the birth finally happened and the freezing air of the cave touched his skin, sheer chaos immediately exploded in the room with the surgical infiltration of the rogue Uchiha. The masked man grabbed the defenseless little body as a hostage, pressing the cold tip of a kunai against the child's neck, while the yellow flash froze in pure paternal despair. In that split second of mortal agony, little Naruto tried to force a burst of natural chakra to push the assassin away, but his immature meridians began to tear apart internally, causing an excruciating pain that almost imploded his organs. The story followed its macabre and bloody march that you know so well, dragging the Hokage, a hostage of his own body, to the final battlefield where the demonic beast was devastating the village. Placed on the stone altar, the baby watched with tear-blurred vision as his beloved parents threw themselves in front of the colossal claw, forming a flesh-and-bone shield to preserve his future. Kushina's warm blood splattered on her son's face, igniting a trauma so deep and violent that the spiritual essence of the future warrior began to warp reality around him. It was exactly at the epicenter of this unbearable grief that the disturbing miracle took place, right before the wide eyes of Hiruzen Sarutobi as he arrived at the ruins. Rejecting the biological chains and physical laws of that world, the newborn swallowed his instinctive cry, raised one of his tiny hands toward the monster, and unleashed a golden wave of pure power that silenced the dawn. That wasn't the wail of a helpless victim, but the fierce manifestation of a corrupted will of fire that made the masked man retreat into the shadows with a chill running down his spine. The adamantine chains that should have belonged solely to Kushina merged with a blinding version of the Asura chakra, wrapping around the fox with a crushing and domineering gravitational force. Minato and Kushina, on the verge of taking their last breaths, widened their eyes in absolute shock upon hearing an adult telepathic voice resonate in their minds, broadcasting a promise of eternal protection from the son they never even got to see grow up. The tragic sacrifice of the parents was sealed in death, but the awakening of a true god of war had just occurred in that destroyed crib. The third Hokage rushed forward to pick up the orphaned child from the rubble, expecting to comfort a traumatized baby who had just lost everything. Looking at the boy's face under the dim light of the blood-stained moon, the old master felt his breath hitch as he met sharp, severe, and absolutely conscious eyes. The newborn didn't shed a single extra tear. He merely flashed a dark, calculating smile, proving that the revenge against Konoha's enemies would begin before he even learned how to walk. The following 12 years weren't marked by childish games or pointless rivalries at the Ninja Academy like you're used to seeing, because the boy carrying the soul of the Seventh Hokage operated like a silent blade in the shadows, orchestrating crucial events with a terrifying coldness. Manipulating the geopolitical landscape of the great nations through advanced shadow clones, he avoided unnecessary bloodshed and set out alone for the gloomy Hidden Rain village, walking under the perpetual storm with a lethal goal burning in his golden chest. The raindrops loaded with the enemy's sensory chakra fell from the gray sky, but they evaporated instantly before even touching the young prodigy's shoulders, repelled by a bestial, orange aura that started warping the moisture in the air around him. At the top of the city's most imposing tower, the ringed eyes of the self-proclaimed god of the New World widened in pure shock, realizing that his perfect sensory barrier had been breached, not by an army or skilled spies, but by an oppressive force you'd only expect to see in ancient legends. Wasting no time on empty speeches or unnecessary displays of military might, the 6 paths of pain descended from the heavens like angels of death, surrounding the blonde intruder with black receivers in hand, ready to execute the ruthless will of the Akatsuki's leader. However, the boy showed absolutely no trace of fear or hesitation in his stance. He just calmly closed his eyes while the red pigment of Sage Mode manifested around his eyelids, blending the pure energy of nature with the overwhelming power of the 9-tailed beast in perfect harmony. The Deva Path extended his pale hand to summon the gravitational force that would destroy the bridge where the invader stood. But before the final word of the jutsu could even escape his lips, a flash of yellow light tore through space-time, obliterating the puppet's head with a brutal strike. Using an upgraded variation of his father's body flicker combined with the absurd perception of natural chakra, Naruto moved so incredibly fast that the sound of his footsteps could only be heard when the other 5 bodies were already crumbling to the ground, completely shattered by a silent and lethal wrath. With the puppets destroyed in a fraction of a second by an attack that would make you jump out of your seat, the disguised young Hokage didn't wait for a counterattack, and used his empathic connection to track the dark flow of the Rinnegan's energy, teleporting straight into the hidden paper sanctuary built by Conan. The sound of the doors shattering echoed through the gloomy hall, revealing Nagato's true body, skeletal and hooked up to his life support machine, coughing up blood as he stared at the blonde demon who had just dismantled his supposed untouchable divinity with humiliating ease. Conan tried to protect her partner by spreading wings of explosive paper in a desperate act of love, but a single pressure wave released by the boy canceled the jutsu mid-air, forcing the kunoichi to her knees while Naruto's majestic and heavy presence filled every corner of that funeral-like space. Fixing a look of adult compassion and tactical disappointment on the defeated leader, the blonde began to recite the names of those Nagato had lost, describing such intimate and exact details of the Rain orphan's past that the Rinnegan wielder felt his sanity crumble. The speech that broke that man's will wasn't made of naive ideals or empty promises about world peace like you've heard so many times, but of cold, calculated facts about the true nature of the organization he led, exposing the dark plan of the Divine Tree with surgical precision. Absorbing the impact of those devastating revelations, Nagato realized that his pain had been manipulated by ghosts from the past, accepting utter defeat by bowing his head before the magnitude of Naruto's overwhelming power, thus sealing a dark and absolutely revolutionary alliance. With the true leader of the Akatsuki now acting as his personal, loyal weapon in the shadows, the young warrior began to consolidate an unbeatable army of rogues under his secret command, neutralizing future threats before the hidden nations could even notice the massive shift on the chessboard. The capture of the other tailed beasts was quietly intercepted, Orochimaru's secret hideouts were purged in relentless golden flames, and every enemy pawn was systematically wiped off the map invisibly, creating a false sense of global security that masked the blonde's perfect and peaceful dictatorship. But while the surface of the world breathed an air of forced calm under this invisible and omnipotent watch, the rotten gears of the oldest shadows on the planet began to turn in a frantic rhythm of pure desperation and chaos, realizing the tragic rupture of their planned destiny. Hidden in the deepest, darkest crevices of the earth, the shadowy and manipulative Black Zetsu felt the flow of history slipping through his fingers in an unacceptable way, realizing with absolute horror that the Gedo statue had been sealed with unbreakable chakra chains and moved to a shielded dimension. The parasitic creature realized in a sickening way that the rules of the game had been changed by an impossible anomaly, deciding that the cautious plan of using Obito Uchiha was nothing but a useless, disposable failure against this new blonde predator dominating the present. Breaking all the restrictions and limits imposed by the passage of time, the living goo initiated a profane and risky process to force the premature resurrection of the only warrior in history capable of going toe-to-toe with the blonde god, consuming the life energy of dozens of hidden vessels. The floor of the ancient cave shook violently as the dark, millennial chakra connected to the fossilized corpse of the ghost of the Uchiha, rewriting the cruel laws of life and death in an accelerated ritual of pure agony that completely disregarded the traditional mechanics of the Edo Tensei. With wide eyes full of anticipation, the creature watched the pale flesh rapidly rebuild itself around the ancient bones. But his sadistic smile froze when he noticed that the reborn eyelids didn't open to reveal the majestic Rinnegan. Instead, they exposed 2 rotting, completely empty sockets dripping with Naruto's own golden chakra. The vile, guttural scream of the shadow parasite echoed through the damp walls of the underground cave as the reality of his imminent failure hit him hard. Realizing in pure despair that the absence of the Rinnegan on the reborn legend's pale face wasn't a flaw in the jutsu, but the result of a flawless trap planted by the blonde god years ago. The searing golden chakra pouring from the ancient Uchiha's empty sockets acted as a relentless tracker that corroded the shadows, tearing the spatial fabric and opening a dimensional rift right in the center of the secret hideout, announcing the arrival of the one who would dictate the absolute end of the millennial plan. Crossing the void at a speed that would make you blink and miss it, the young bearer of the Will of Fire landed on the rocky ground with an imperial stance, radiating a density of natural energy so oppressive that the oxygen in the room seemed to evaporate in a split second. Giving the enemy zero time to process the brutal invasion, he raised his right hand covered in black spiral seals, revealing to the creeping manipulator that the ghetto statue had been secretly infected by a reverse sealing back during the Rain Village invasion, turning the ultimate host into his own inescapable chakra prison. The ghost of the Uchiha let out a hoarse, sinister laugh that echoed through the rubble even without his original eyesight, feeling the child's absurd killing intent right in front of him, forcing his newly awakened reserves to burn violently to manifest the gigantic blue ribs of his legendary complete Susanoo. Refusing to submit and initially ignoring the fact that he was just a pawn in a much bigger story, he launched a colossal sword strike aiming to split the continent in half, proving exactly why his name had been feared for generations as the unquestionable and lethal apex of the ninja world. But the boy carrying the heavy baggage of future wars didn't step back a single millimeter against the spiritual chakra titan, expanding his own orange aura to form a compressed and incredibly massive avatar of the nine-tailed fox, blocking the destructive blade with just one of its dense, flaming tails. The impact of the collision between these two overwhelming powerhouses generated a deafening shockwave that disintegrated the cave's ceiling, exposing the battlefield to the starry dawn sky, while the blonde counterattacked with surgical fury, shattering the rival's absolute armor with a punch loaded with pure natural energy. Seeing his ultimate warrior get beaten down with humiliating and repulsive ease, the black creature realized his millennial existence was hanging by a thread, desperately trying to sink his slimy body into the earth to escape through the shadows and find a new vessel that could harbor the rabbit goddess's will in a distant future. However, the cunning Hokage foresaw exactly that cowardly move, and slammed his palms onto the rocky floor, activating a massive sealing web of the Uzumaki clan that lit up the entire valley with a blinding glow, dragging the ancient goo back to the surface while burning its essence with sacred chains. Pinned down by the unbearable pain of the adamantine locks piercing his dark physical form, the parasite was forced by the spiritual pressure to confess his age-old crimes out loud, revealing in front of the disbelieving resurrected warrior how he had tampered with the ancient stone tablet to create the endless cycle of bloody hatred. Hearing the bitter truth that his obsessed quest for an illusory peace was nothing but a cruel manipulation orchestrated by a despicable shadow, the proud and ancient Sharingan wielder felt the weight of his choices break his unshakable will, undoing the blue avatar and dropping to his knees on the cold ground, completely humiliated. With the geopolitical and mystical landscape totally dominated under his severe and calculating gaze, the blonde savior brought his hands together in a hand seal you know perfectly well, summoning the skeletal and terrifying figure of the death god into the physical plane, but in a superior way that warped all the vital laws taught by his late father. Using the exact resonance between the Six Paths chakra and the crushing vitality of the beast inside him, he forced the pale deity to ignore his own human soul as a tribute, pointing his fingers straight at the macabre vessel and the rotting seed that would bring about the end of humanity. The spectral reaper sliced the wind with its invisible blade in a perfect glowing arc of absolute doom, piercing through the shadowy creature's chest and grabbing the concentrated essence of the Ten Tails sealed within the folds of the dimension connected to the legendary warrior's fake body, dragging all that evil into its sharp claws. The force of the phantom suction created a deafening vortex that tried to consume even the starlight around them, while the boy endured the excruciating pain of ancestral energy rushing through his veins and smiled compassionately, knowing deep in his soul that he was tearing out the root of darkness once and for all. The ancestral parasite let out one last high-pitched scream of despair as its millennial consciousness was devoured and locked in the stomach of the underworld for eternity, permanently erasing the threat of an alien return and wiping the board of destiny clean for the next generations to be born completely free of any cruel manipulation. The revolted man who once dreamed of the Red Moon's illusion watched his own liberation through empty eyes, bowing his shoulders in a genuine sign of respect and acceptance before the moral greatness of that relentless boy, just before his fake earthen body crumbled into floating ashes that vanished into the serene night breeze. The healing and refreshing silence finally took over the shattered valley when the deep sealing was fully completed, marking the absolute end of a war that was won silently before the nations even dreamed of its existence, all thanks to the dark genius and solitary sacrifice of a hero who broke every rule of time to protect the world. Exhausted in every muscle fiber but carrying ultimate peace in a heart that was now much lighter, the golden-haired boy slowly walked back toward the welcoming lights of Konoha under the warm rays of dawn, with the unshakable certainty that the ninja universe would write its own future on a blank slate. The journey of this unforgettable protagonist has reached its epic conclusion, and I am absolutely sure this narrative just blew your mind. So smash that like button right now to support the project and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next insane stories I'm cooking up for you. Since you're already in the mood to uncover heavy scripts and secrets, go check out the other video that just dropped on the channel explaining a dark theory that will change how you see everything. Thanks a lot for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.